Morning Toast.
All right, Dr. Kuehl, thanks for joining the Morning Toast. This is
You're
round
welcome.
3.
Thanks. It is. It is.
I'm trying to remember who it was yesterday. Somebody came up and they're like, "You have a morning toast again tomorrow?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Who?" I said, "Dr. Kuehl." And they said, "Dr. Kuehl." And I explained to him, it's the Economist. Oh, the funny guy. So you're the only
Very
person I
good.
know,
Very good.
you're the only person I know that can make like financial stuff sound interesting and humorous. So
Well, my goal in life is to be Ben Stein, so I have a lot to live up to. So
I don't know. I think his goal should be to be you, but
yeah, there you go.
all that said. So anyway, I appreciate you coming on. Man, our world just keeps getting dicier and dicier, doesn't it? Just every time we
Well,
turn around, we're like,
it,
hold my
it
beer. I got another challenge.
yeah, it does and it doesn't. I mean, a lot of my talks lately have been kind of trying to talk people off a ledge,
Yeah.
and it's been. I mean, we know that the media has a tendency to over dramatize. And when you are dealing with economics, I'm convinced that most of the journalists had a bad experience in Econ 101.
Yeah.
They have hated it ever since. And they really don't like economists. And so they said, this is boring and I'm gonna have to try to liven it up. So the best way to do this is to scare people witless. And it's
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
does the data support that? No, but I'm going to say it anyway. So
Well, I've got all kinds of thoughts going on. I'll try to like organize them here, but I think to start, some of them all relate to the inflation that we've got
right,
going on. And just to sort of dumb things down for me, correct me if I'm wrong, but what causes inflation is an increase in production. Increase in production is lost because of materials or wages. Surge in demand. People are willing to pay more for things because they're more in demand, and not enough product being produced, all of which have been going on. But nothing I see in there mentions anything about nothing I've researched says a thing about the fact that we've dumped like $5 trillion into an economy over the last 3 years. And does that have an impact? And are we seeing some of that now?
basically everything you just said about inflation is true except for the one we're in now. And everything that people have been saying, it's like, oh my God, there's no. Yes, there is. Oh my God, there's too much money. No, there isn't.
Got it.
Oh my God, there's too much demand. No, there's not.
I already feel that.
It's like why are we having inflation? I see we have inflation, and I thought, do you live in a cave? Have you not heard of Russia?
Yeah.
Has the thought of losing the second largest oil producer on the planet, and that is what's been causing inflation. 70% of the inflation that we're seeing right now is energy related. I mean, if you look at
Yep.
the Europeans just announced that they saw inflation jump again, 8.6%, and they're sort of at the epicenter of all of this energy-related inflation.
Yep.
If you look at the price increases, 48% of that jump was oil and gas, 30% of it was food. You add those up, and it's like, that's 3/4 of the inflation. And it's like, yeah, if you didn't have that, because they'll separate out, as all central banks do, what they call the core from real inflation. Real inflation is going to pick up oil and food. Core inflation doesn't, because those are considered very volatile prices. And so economists have always tried to make a distinction. The core rate of inflation in Europe went down.
Interesting.
The other inflation went up. And it's like, well, the reason that the core inflation has gone down is that none of the other real drivers for inflation are in play right now. I mean, you point out that we dumped a lot of money into the economy. We ended up going into 2021 with something like $5 trillion in excess savings, but
Right.
we spent it all in 1 year.
Got
So that money supply is not playing a role now, because as consumers, we made up for lost time. And the reason that we had all this money in the economy in the first place is that we weren't able to spend it in 2020. So it's kind of like if we hadn't had the shutdown and the closure of the entire service economy, there never would have been this bubble of money because the government would have been not spending it, but beyond that, the consumer would have spent it in 2020 when they first received it. Well, they couldn't in 2020, so they did it in 2021, but we
Yeah.
still blew through it all. So with the central banks, and you can tell just by the way they're talking, they're raising rates and they're talking about it, but with every comment they're saying, and we don't think it'll help.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
Yeah.
it's not that kind of inflation. If
Right.
we were really trying to actually deal with the money supply issue, yeah, the interest rate hikes would work. But they're all sort of like, yeah, I don't think Putin really cares that we're
Right.
raising the interest rates.
Got it. All right. So I just want to, again, in the interest of dumbing it down, continuing that, we raise interest rates to halt or to at least, throttle back inflation, right? But everybody out there is talking about things, and I'm seeing others jump on the bandwagon. The people that we sort of go to when we think the sky is falling, right? Like Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan Chase. We go to Carl Icahn and Elon Musk, and there's others weighing in on things like Deutsche Bank and Wells Fargo. Even Fannie Mae is talking about the fact that they're, from what I've just read, they're signaling that recession second half of next year, but everybody's got their own take on things. And what's confusing to me is I have this feeling as though everybody's going back to what traditionally causes a recession. But we've got like something totally unique and different going on. And I feel like to me, I have to like use these dumb analogies to understand this stuff. So you've got a golden goose that's used to laying eggs. That's our economy, used to laying golden eggs, and it's got a broken leg. Well, everybody knows how to fix the broken leg. You raise the interest rates, the leg heals, and you're good. Well, we have a broken leg, a broken neck, a tummy ache. There's all these things going on at the same time, and we've never had it before. So I just have this feeling that when I read a quote from Carl Icahn, is he just trying to fix the broken leg, or does he get the whole picture?
Well, I don't want to be rude about people like Carl and Elon, but I don't build electric cars because that's not what I do. Elon is not an economist. Neither
Right.
is Carl Icahn. Neither is Jamie Dimon. Neither
That's
are
right.
a lot of these people. And it's like, you're really good at what you do. But honestly, particularly someone like Carl Icahn, Carl makes his money when people in the market panic and
Yeah.
sell off perfectly good stock, which he
That's right.
then buys at a discount.
Which he's
So
been doing. I mean, that's kind of
yeah,
his.
I mean, this is kind of like, you talk to a used car salesman who convinces you that, this car has only been driven on alternate Sundays by a little old lady, despite the fact that you're looking at the thing having 800,000 miles on it. And it's
Right.
apparently her church was someplace in Mongolia and she drove
Bald
there.
back tires,
And
rear wheel
it's like, okay, why do you believe somebody who is so patently trying to feather their own nest? And you're absolutely right that there's a lot of predictions about the recession. But to be honest, economists are really bad at what we are supposed to do, which is forecasting. We have forecasted 13 of the last 3 recessions. And honestly, when we're forecasting, we're more warning than we are really predicting because we know we can't look out that far. It's like a weatherman telling you what it's going to do in July of next year. All
Right.
he can really tell you is probably hotter than January, just guessing. So the economist is basically saying if you don't deal with these issues, you are going to have a problem in 2023. If you don't deal with the supply chain, if you don't deal with the energy crisis, if you don't deal with the labor supply, so on and so forth, you're going to hit a wall. But you
Well,
now have the warning. You've got months to do something about this. You've got a plan theoretically in place. If oil prices are too high, well, do something. The US, for example, will hit records next year in oil production. We're already the number one oil producer in the world. We account for about 15% of total global production. Russia, until recently, accounted for about 13.5%, and Saudi Arabia about 12.5. So the three of us account for 30% of oil. The US is going to be doing 13 million barrels a day. We've never done that much before. So that's a reaction theoretically to the oil shortage, and eventually it begins to bring oil prices down. So I look ahead to 2023 and saying, yeah, if we don't do anything and we leave everything the way it is now, yeah, we're going to hit a recession. But how stupid would that be?
Right.
We're going to react. We're going to do something. I can't conceive of the Ukraine war and the sanctions still raging at the level they are now a year from now.
Right.
I don't see the supply chain in China being as broken as it is now a year from now. It's just it defies logic.
I was surprised as digging into this how much of those little data points we are reliant as much with on Russia. Like for
Hmm.
example, some of the supply chain for even the electronic components I didn't realize came from that region. And like as you said, oil production's bigger there than in Saudi Arabia. I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah.
So just again,
Yeah, we're
surprising.
not we're not very dependent on Russia for much outside commodities. I mean, the two things that we get from Russia are, and we don't get much oil and gas. We import very little from Russia, period. The Europeans, on the other hand, do. And something that we tend to forget is that, okay, well, we don't bring it in from Russia. So what difference does it make? Well, the Europeans do. And
Yep.
since the Europeans can't get it from the Russians right now, we have increased our exports of diesel to
Yep.
Europe by 80%. So our diesel prices are high, not because we're consuming it, but because we're sending it to them. We are sending them LNG. We're sending them anything we can. Otherwise, they can't handle the sanctions. So we just kind of have to accept the fact that short of sending in troops, this is the best we can do to support Ukraine, but it is requiring a sacrifice. It's
Yep.
basically, what are we doing to help Ukraine? Paying more at the pump. That's what we're doing to help Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, we help them like a lot. I
Yeah,
feel.
we do. We do. I mean, and there's going to be conversation for decades as to whether we should have done something sooner than this. Almost everybody miscalculated what was going to take place. Russia was of the opinion, and the whole world was of the opinion, that this whole intervention would be done in 2 weeks. I
Right.
mean, if you go back to 2014 when Russia took the Crimea, that's what people thought would happen. The Russians would come in with overwhelming force. The Ukrainians would not resist. The world would say, gee, that's a shame. We're going to put that on your permanent record. And then it was over. And Russia had Crimea. That
Let me.
didn't happen this time.
I want to ask you this. Let's say Russia never happened. Let's say there was never an invasion. How do you? What picture would we be looking at right now? Would you predict? Like we'd still have a bit of a economic turmoil.
No,
With
not much. Not much at all.
really.
Not much at all,
Okay.
because there was nothing setting up a decline. I mean, we had the issues that came out of the supply chain. So even without Russia, we would have had the issues of supply chain congestion in
Yep.
China, China's COVID policy, and all the rest. So that would have played a role. But the biggest concerns for the US would have been, to a degree, the supply chain and labor force.
Right.
If we had have seen anything pushing inflation other than fuel prices, it's been wages. The
Right.
wage increases have been around 5.2% annually, and which is quite high. Something we have been anticipating for years, or should have been. I mean, it's not rocket science to know that a boomer was going to turn 65. You even knew when,
Right.
exactly what hour. Fred here was born at 2 o'clock on June 23rd, and he's going to turn 65 in 65 years. Fred will have to be replaced at that point unless you talk him into working a little longer, which a lot of boomers did and do.
Yep.
But eventually, I mean, working into your 60s and 70s is one thing, but I mean, we really can't count on the boomers hanging in there until they're 112. I
Yep.
mean, there just comes a point. So,
Right. Interesting. Well, you've already, like I said, in a short time, completely changed my perspective on a couple things. I knew that there was a number of factors sort of weighing in, but I didn't realize the sort of percentage relevance of, the Russian conflict versus everything else. One interesting point, though, is I remember that I'm sure we've all seen it, the movie The Big Short, where Michael Burry predicted the housing bubble. And was like the only one to do that. That was really interesting to me. But he has basically pulled out, he's shut down his fund, is telling everybody to just, get out of the markets, buy gold. And that's just kind of interesting to me that he's saying all that at the same time. And I think it wasn't until I heard him make the comment that I thought I better dig into this a little further, because the guy got it right once, and when everybody else was saying something else.
Right. And it's important to recognize that when people get it right once, that's impressive. Get it right 2 or 3 times.
Right.
I mean, it's like
right.
it's the consistency matters. And right now there's a lot of conversation about the markets and why they have collapsed so dramatically. But if you go and you read what the Fed officials, particularly the hawks, have been saying for the last several years, they said, look, the reason that we don't like rates this low is it hurts savers and all that stuff. But the real problem is that people in the market were able to go out and borrow huge sums of money at virtually no interest and then put it in the market. That's what drove our market for 10 years, is that people could borrow literally millions and did borrow millions. And the warning was that works until the market corrects. And then all of a sudden, you're going to have to come up with the cash to pay those loans back. Because what's happening in the market right now, every investment advisor you ever talk to is going to say, do not sell when the market is falling. It's too late. You've got to have done that ahead of time. So what's happening? All these very sophisticated market people are selling like crazy as the market falls. That's stupid. You're not supposed to do that. They don't have a choice. They have a loan that's due. You've got a bank that's saying, excuse me, you borrowed $150 million from me. It's due now. I want it now. I don't care what you have to sell. Pay me. And so this guy is going, I shouldn't be selling my stocks now, but what choice do I have?
Right.
So the hawks all along were saying it's going to distort people's behavior. At some point, these guys will have satisfied their loan requirements and they can kind of go back to normal, because we all know the mantra is buy low, sell high, not buy high, sell low.
Right. So. Exactly. Okay. I've got some additional data points that I thought were interesting. We had our VP of Finance go out and was invited to our bank has a sort of a community survey they do, and we're really involved with those now too. And it's by community, I mean like industry wide through the bank, and it's every type of business, not just technology, not just AV. And some interesting data points came out of that, and we've been responding to these as we go. But this latest one, 90% of the businesses that responded, including us, by the way, were pessimistic on the economy, but less so for our own industry, just because we can see the forecast. So we're all saying we're scared, but we're looking at our balance sheet and we're looking at our forecast and things look good. And they do here too, by the way. We pretty well can see what's going on for the balance of the year. They also were optimistic about their own company performance over the next year. All of us were. And they were, the revenue growth they predicted would be flat. That's the first time. The prior surveys didn't. So we all kind of felt like we were going to be pumping the brakes a little because of inflation, and we can't always pass every penny along. If we could find a way where we can raise prices immediately when costs are raised, it just is impossible. So there's always this gap that'll squeeze profits out. And the growth percentage predict is going to decline. We all kind of felt that way. So over the next maybe 24 months. So when I look at that, all of us who don't know any better think there's a mild recession coming. But we think people more smarter than us are saying there's a huge recession coming.
Well, people are not smarter than you. And what you're seeing is the impact of media hysteria. I mean, that is the subject that you've been seeing throughout, is like individuals looking at their business, looking at their situation are going, well, I'm doing okay, but oh my God, the world's coming to an
Right.
end. And it's like, no, it's not. What you've got is it's almost the equivalent of anybody who lives in a city. They look at the daily news, and if you didn't live there, you would assume that you lived in Beirut.
Yeah, right.
Because every morning it's like 500 people were shot today, and these people were killed, and these people were killed, and those people were killed. And you're like, really? I've lived here my entire life, and I've never seen any of that. It's like,
Right.
I know better than to go to that street.
Right.
And if I was a drug dealer, I'd be worried. But I'm not a drug dealer. I just work for an insurance company, and that, I'm not going to run into that. That's what we're running into when it comes to the economy. You've got people that are predicting something that really isn't that imminent. I mean, the data
Right.
points that I've been pointing out to people, the purchasing managers index is firmly in positive territory. It's the mid 50s.
Yep.
Capacity utilization is up almost to the normal range where it hasn't been in 10 years. Private investment is at record levels. Corporations are spending more money than they have spent in years. So every time you look at something, it's like this is retail numbers are up.
Right.
Construction is growing. And a lot of what's been driving kind of the expectation of slower growth is how fast we grew last year. We were
Right.
growing at almost 6% in 2021. We have to come off of that. The latest kind of consensus view from Congressional Budget Office and the World Bank and a bunch of the others is growth in the US 2%, 2.5, which is a third of what it was last year. So it feels really slow compared to
Yeah.
what we had. That's our 25-year norm.
Right. But there's
So,
contrast where we
yeah.
were, like a lot.
And so we've been whipsawed in the last couple of years. We had abysmally low growth in 2020. We know why. We had rapid growth in 2021 as we rebounded from 2020. Now we're settling into a pattern, but it's kind of
Yeah.
like we experienced such radical shifts that we're not used to norm at the moment. So
Right.
I'm still pretty skeptical about a recession per se. And again, it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. It requires 2 straight quarters of negative growth.
That's right.
And I don't think we're going to hit that. I think we're going to get slow growth, and companies are going to be a little more cautious. But at the same time, they're having to spend money because they can't find the workers. So they're putting more money into robotics. They're laying in more inventory because they don't
Right.
trust the supply chain anymore. So those types of things. And even the housing sector, things have changed enough that bubbles are rare. And
Right.
it's generally a bubble housing market would occur when you get too many people moving into a community for it to sustain job growth. But now that we're in the remote world, talking to the city manager at Austin, they say we're getting 200 people a day moving to Austin. I
Right.
said, do you really have that many jobs? No, we don't need them. They're coming here with jobs. They
That's
have a remote
yeah.
job with
They don't
some
need to
company
work
in,
in the city.
yeah, that the company they work for is in Duluth. And the company said, where would you rather live, Duluth or Austin?
Right. I talked to my Crestron rep here a couple of weeks ago and realized he'd been living in Florida for a year and a
Yeah.
half
Yeah.
instead of Chicago.
Yeah.
Just interesting. So you also made me feel good about the fact that you're saying my house is really worth as much as it says it is right now. Like,
Yeah. Well, yeah. I
oh,
mean,
man.
we're still short 5 million homes for
Holy
demand,
cow.
and we only
Yeah.
build about 1.5 million a year.
Yep.
So there is still a runway as far as homes. Now, the lower end, the starter homes, they're going to be affected by the higher mortgage rates. But even those rates, they're
Yep.
up. They're in the 6s now, which is much higher than the 3s and 4s. But, we're nowhere near. Some of us are long enough in the tooth to remember the 80s when
Yep.
Volcker jammed the rates up to 20%, and a
Right.
good mortgage was 33%.
Right. That's right. I do remember. It's funny because I know of a couple of friends that have sold their home, and we're just going to rent this teeny tiny apartment and hang out there for a few months until this whole thing blows up. It might not
Yeah.
be the
Yeah, it may not be the case, but you're seeing a lot of that, and that's part of what's been driving what's happening in the existing home market. Because people who were in the boomer generation are like, okay, I needed a big place when I had
Yeah,
kids and wanted to work in the yard, which I no longer do. So I'm going to move into a much smaller situation and save money, or because of the remote. I mean, talking to the Chamber of Commerce in Des Moines, they consider Des Moines a suburb of Chicago. There are so many people working remotely for companies in Chicago,
right.
and they got to looking at the prices and said, I can either spend like $2 or $3 million for some little crammed in shotgun, or I can move to like Ames and
Yeah,
own half the county.
a dollar goes further.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Totally. All right. So real quick, couple more questions, and then we can sort of bottle this all up. I feel so much. I'm almost afraid to ask you more questions because you'll the whole house of cards will come crashing down. No, but regarding our industry, so you supply economic data for NSCA. I know you've done that for a
Mm-hmm.
while. You also supply Avixa and
Mm-hmm.
got it. Okay, so I had heard I was talking to actually Dave Labuscus here at Infocom a few weeks ago, and I understand that our industry, this is like bringing it home now to AV and
Mm-hmm.
technology specifically, that our industry is outpacing the global GDP, which is fantastic. So we've got strong demand. We still have a supply chain issue. In fact, I think ours is worse than like
Mm-hmm.
other sectors because they're gobbling up all the chips first, which is a
Right.
whole other podcast. But our fundamentals are strong apart from that data point, and we have pent up demand,
Mm-hmm.
and we're also living the construction model. So even if there was a crash or something big that happened, we see it coming before others because we're doing jobs that were already earmarked, dollars funded 12 months ago, 16
Right.
months ago in some cases, and that's why we can accurately predict the rest of our year.
Right.
It's 2023, maybe the tail end of 2023 and 2024 that's the piece that I'm just nervous about. And I think you're out of your mind stupid if you don't have some kind of plan in place to react if you see something like that coming ahead of time. But other than that, we're prepared, and it doesn't seem as bad as maybe we thought it was.
No, I don't think it is. And the two areas that you're most vulnerable to, and you mentioned one of them, supply chain, because you truly have a global supply chain. This is something that it's not only China, it's every country in Asia that produces it. We are now getting a little more serious about producing that domestically. But the other thing is labor. I've talked with NSCA members repeatedly saying our issue is we don't have people that can do the job. We are already automated, so we need people that know how to use this technology and can implement. The reason that you're seeing such growth is that everything has moved in your direction. I mean, it's the fact that in order to conduct business now, if you are not at the top of your game when it comes to AV, you can't compete. I mean, just on a very simple level, I mean, it's the fact that people are doing early on, remote was primitive. I mean, it was like
Right.
you maybe got a Zoom call, and God, now, I mean, you've got dancing girls showing up in the middle of the presentation because you're trying to make it more of a production. Every organization that I speak to now, it used to be either or. You either show up personally or you do it as a Zoom. Well, now they're mixing the Zoom right in with
Yeah.
the presentation. So the whole push has been more towards using technology. There is a demand right now for 73,000 data centers in the next 18 months.
Wow. So control room or just IT network infrastructure to deal with all the extra Zoom calls. I mean,
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that people have just become comfortable, and the expectation is that you're going to have all of this technology. And if
yeah,
you don't have it, then there's a sense that, well, what's wrong with you? I mean,
right.
this exists. And I, remember NSA meetings where people have talked about using these techniques and technologies for sterilizing the workplace and protecting against outbreaks. And I mean, there's just the list of things that can be done with this technology just continues to grow.
Right.
So the big threats, and you're accurate to worry about as you go forward. It's going to be that supply chain. How fast can it keep up with demand? And then worrying about the labor force. And that's something that, I've talked with NSC people before. It's like all the different programs trying to get people into the field and train, and
Right.
because the education system is routinely 10 years behind demand.
Right.
It's like you've got all these colleges and universities. Excuse me, do you have degrees in this?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, but we have a great course in Chaucer and
Right.
underwater Greek literature. Yeah,
Right.
there's not a big demand for that.
That's right. That's right. No, you've definitely hit on a hot button for us. I talk about that probably more than anything, about how we really need. This is the moment for our industry to step out of the cottage realm and
Mhm.
grow up into the American university that we can
Right,
graduate with an engineering degree, and that's maybe for another podcast.
right.
So we'll end with one last comment and with your opinion, and that is all of this talk about manufacturing in the United States, and we're doing this new big chip fab in I think Texas, and
And one
I'm
in
not
Ohio too.
and Ohio. So we're going to see more of that, but nobody's talking about the fact that the core component cost is going to be you know, sort of US based modeled cost, not China based modeled costs. So we can expect things are going to be more expensive when, when they hit the street. And I heard many people talking about that, like probably more so even now. We're paying a sort of a ransom on, the sort of increased in component costs, but we haven't seen how much these devices are if they're produced here, totally
Right.
produced here.
And I think one of the things to be aware of, though, is that the Chinese cost for that kind of stuff isn't as cheap as it is for many of the other things the Chinese make. I mean, the
Yep.
Chinese got an adjustment or an advantage because what they produced were cheaper consumer goods.
Yeah.
And there was a real advantage to having low cost labor and all that sort of stuff. Well, the components that they're producing for your industry are made the same way there as they
I
are
think
here.
they're robotically based.
They're
And
made with robots, they're made with high tech. China has a worse shortage of high tech workers than we do.
wow.
It
Okay.
is not a country that is really well positioned for the future. Almost a quarter of the Chinese population is over 65. Almost half the population is over 55, and you have a balance right now of 57% men and 43% women. So their population is declining. We're not in that circumstance. We're not as young as some production areas in the world, but we're a lot more equal to Chinese production, Asian production than we used to be. And that gives us a little bit of a disadvantage as these things start to come out of the US. But let's also remember how more expensive transportation has become.
Right. And
So,
and abandoning just in time ordering and supply, and we've
yeah.
learned a huge lesson.
Yeah, I mean, a good example, and people have run into this already. Before all of this crisis and the supply chain hit, a container cost was 5 or 6 thousand bucks a container. It hit $29,000 a container. It is
Yeah,
currently at $13,000 a container. If you triple the cost of transportation, that offsets an awful lot of that higher
that's
wage
right.
in a country where your transportation is, can I get it from Ohio to Indiana?
That's
Yep,
right.
yep. You're not going to need a ship for that.
And
Um,
no log jam of containers
nope,
when
nope.
the ports can't handle it all, and so that there's definitely a huge bottleneck relieved. So I guess
Right,
what you're saying is even if there's a slight increase here, there's a drastic decrease here, and
right.
again, a nothing burger to be sort of fussing about.
Yeah, I mean, it can be accommodated, and obviously companies are going to have to watch how they react. And as we kept talking about labor costs, as those continue to go up, that becomes more of an issue. So it kind of all wraps around. If we don't want labor costs to run out of control, it's when you have to start worrying a lot more about training and where that workforce is going to come from.
Got it. Dr. Kuehl, you have succeeded once again in making me feel so much better. after talking through all this stuff. I mean, literally right to the very last point. So thank you for joining once again.
You're welcome.
And I know you probably do so many of these. You got more lined up today, but hopefully go find something fun to do this weekend. Enjoy the 4th. And we sure appreciate you taking time to spend with us here. So
You're welcome. Thanks.
yep, very good. All right, you take care.
Thanks.
The morning toast. The morning toast. The morning toast. The morning toast. The morning toast.